Well, everyone, it's time for us to go ahead and compare the iPad 10th generation that just came out and the iPad 6 that came out a few years ago and see which specific one is the better one for you. Now, if you want to pick up one of these newer iPads, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of both of these iPads, what's very interesting is that, first of all, the iPad 6 is no longer being sold. It hasn't been sold for like many years, but this was a very important iPad, I would say, because it was kind of one of the last 9.7-inch displays. You know, this panel on the front with that 9.7-inch Retina display was actually not that bad. You know, I thought it was a pretty decent display when it first came out, and although the bezel around it definitely is a little bit more dated than a lot of other, tablets that have came out since then, I still think the panel itself isn't bad, and it's still 60 Hz, but I still think it's a very decent display, again, for how old this specific tablet is. You're getting the front camera, getting the home button with Touch ID, and although we're still getting Touch ID on the latest iPad, I still think this is perfectly fine, and I don't have any issues at all with this type of display. It's just the bezel around it is kind of the problem, if that makes any sense. Now with the iPad 10, we're getting a 10.9-inch Liquid Retina display. It also has True Tone on it, and now the front camera is now not slanted, but it's now in landscape mode. So you can actually go and use it more like how a MacBook's camera is, on top and bottom, in landscape mode. Now you can go and use it here, which is so awesome. So personally, this is one of my favorite things about this new iPad. The display looks really good. I wouldn't say it's like, worlds better than the iPad 6, but you are getting a better display with True Tone now. There's way less bezel on it. There's no home button. You have Touch ID in the power button, and I still think this is a very, very good looking iPad for sure. Definitely no complaints for me on this end. Now, we do have a flat side type of styling on the iPad 10, where on the iPad 6, we had this kind of curved side to it. Now, I don't know if, again, one is the way better one over the other one, but I do like having something like the iPad 6 around because, it is much slimmer, it's much thinner, kind of, feels kind of somewhat better in the hand, but the iPad 10 feels way more modern, and I don't want to just hate on the iPad 6 too much because it's so easy to do that, but the iPad 10 is definitely the far better one when it comes down to that standpoint for sure. Now, on the iPad 6, we had a lightning port at the bottom with a headphone jack, which was cool, so you can go and connect all your lightning accessories and all that cool stuff, as well as an Apple Pencil 1. The iPad 10 now supports a USB-C, so we now have a USB-C port on that tablet, which is now actually really cool. So again, having that type of capability is awesome, and personally, I think that's a really cool thing that Apple did. Having USB-C on this iPad is awesome. Unfortunately, they had to go and do something dumb, and it still supports, Apple Pencil 1, which Apple Pencil 1 is fine. I don't have a problem with it, but the issue is that we now have to buy another dongle to go and kind of connect it from the Apple Pencil 1 to our new iPad. Why couldn't they just support Apple Pencil 2 on this iPad? It makes no sense at all. They should have just done it in the beginning and now we're stuck with this iPad with this, design for however long, maybe like another year or two. I feel like they should have just put Apple Pencil 2 on it in the first place. So both these iPads share that. They both support Apple Pencil 1. Now on the back, we also have the flat backs on both, which I think is another cool thing. I like flat backs. I don't want any jagged edges or anything like that. And we have the camera on the top left corner with the Apple logo in the center. We have some certification stuff at the bottom. So again, I think this is a really cool thing they did. I like the design of the iPad 10. I think it does look overall way better than the iPad 6. I will say though, the 6 still feels fairly premium. The 6 is definitely an older one, but I'm still kind of surprised how premium the iPad 6 still feels for how old that specific tablet is. So that is a really, really cool thing as well. So when it comes down to it, you're definitely getting an overall better performing iPad that just feels and performs way better, in my opinion, on the iPad, 10 than on the iPad 6. So definitely keep that in mind when it comes down to it. Now in the camera department, this is another very interesting thing. So on the iPad 10, we have a 12 megapixel wide angle camera and then a 12 megapixel landscape ultra wide front camera, where the iPad 6 now has an 8 megapixel wide camera and a 1.2 megapixel front facing camera. So the best way to kind of describe it, as I've been describing in all my videos, the iPad 6 pretty much has the same camera as the iPhone 6. The iPad 10 has the same camera almost as like an iPhone 10R with maybe like an iPhone 11 or 12 front camera. So definitely improvements were made, which is really nice. So if you're wanting to go ahead and use a camera and you need to use an iPad camera, the iPad 10 is going to be the better way to go in pretty much every single area. But keep in mind that if you have an iPhone 10 or newer, or an iPhone 6 or newer, your phone is going to have a better camera for the most part than the iPad 6 and or the iPad 10. So that is another thing to keep in mind. Personally, I would probably just look at the iPad 10 as having a good camera if you need to, like in a pinch, but I wouldn't depend on it too much. But you are getting overall way better features on the iPad 10. You're getting way better camera quality, higher resolutions you can film in, and just a more dependable camera on the iPad 10 side than on the iPad 6. So that is another big, massive thing to keep in mind. But otherwise, I don't think I would go and upgrade just because of the camera. Well, it's because I do basically everything on my phone now. So all the camera and the photography is usually done on my phone if it's not for YouTube. So that kind of covers it up there. Now, in the other standpoint, when it comes down to the software, this is another big thing. The iPad 6 pretty much has the same chipset as the iPhone 7. The iPad 10 now has the same chipset as the iPhone 12. Now, why is that important? Well, the iPhone 7 is now unsupported with software. I think the iPad 6 is not going to be discontinued probably for the next 2 years. But, it's kind of on thin ice. Who knows? It could be discontinued to, next year. And it wouldn't really be shocking to me because the iPhone 7 was already discontinued with software. So if you want the longest lasting iPad, the iPad 10 is definitely going to be the better way to go. And this is where the bigger differences, I would say, start to kind of, come up. It's because the iPad 10 has that newer chipset. This is probably, besides the design, the bigger change here, at least going from these generations of iPads. So in my opinion, that is probably what I would recommend doing, is going from an iPad 6 to an iPad 10, especially if you want the longer lasting iPad. But this also trickles down to the performance side as well. If you want the better performing iPad, the iPad 10 is clearly going to be the better one. Like I mentioned, the iPad 6 has the same performance as the iPhone 7. The iPad 10 will give you somewhat of the same performance as the iPhone 12. So that is a big, big difference. So those are, some pretty big things to keep in mind. Personally, I think the iPad 6, I know some people who still use the iPad 6 and they are still having pretty decent experience with that type of iPad. I think that's a really cool thing Apple did, by supporting the iPad, by giving it that chipset, and I think that's a really cool thing. But I don't think you need to go and upgrade today. Like if you're a student who's taking notes and you don't really do anything demanding on your iPad, that seems to be like a lot of people who end up using some of these older iPads, and I think that's totally fine. But if you're somebody who is planning on using your iPad to do everything, like you're going to be editing, your papers, you're going to be editing videos, playing games, this is like your workhorse machine, you're going to be, watching videos and other things like that, then it might make a little bit more sense, at least in my experience, to go and get the best iPad you can do, whether that's the iPad 10 or that's the iPad 9. You don't have to just go up and get the iPad 10. You can also get the iPad 9 that is still also being sold brand new by Apple for much cheaper than this thing, and that might be a better deal for some people out there. So personally, those are kind of the big differences there. And to be honest, when it kind of comes down to it, I think the iPad 10 is clearly the better iPad in pretty much every single area. But if you have an iPad 6 and you're still okay with it, then, feel free to keep it. But I do also want to let you know that you don't have to go from the iPad 6 to the iPad 10. There are so many other iPads available for you that you can go ahead and choose really like your next big upgrade. You can also get an iPad 9th generation that I mentioned. And if you're a student, I believe Apple's still doing the student discount, and I believe that iPad is like $299. So that is substantially cheaper with that student discount on that iPad. Otherwise, I think it's $329, which is still a very, very good deal. So that right there is a big reason why you may just want to go up and get the iPad 9, because it is a very good iPad for sure. And you can save a little bit more money than having to buy that dongle. You can still get an iPad Air 4. That is a very good iPad as well. And you might be able to maybe pick up a used iPad Pro, maybe not the M1 model, but maybe the one right before that, the A12XC chipset, whichever that one was, maybe for the same price as this thing after tax. There are a lot of options you can buy now. Some in the brand new market, some in the used market. But honestly, I think the iPad 10, it's a good iPad. They just made some really weird decisions, but definitely I would say it's better than the iPad 6 for sure. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.